Was it worth the wait for Android apps on Windows?
And should you use an electric vehicle's battery to power your home?
And can Chrome OS Flex give new life to your old computer?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hey there, welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists to dive into the big stories of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and sitting beside me as always in the virtual Vertical Hold studio is Alex Kidman. Hey Alex, I saw you reviving an ancient BlackBerry the other day. What other old tech do you think deserves to come back from the dead?
Well, the obvious answer out of me would be retro gaming consoles, of course. I should point out I wasn't so much reviving that BlackBerry as giving it a lobotomy. It had originally belonged to Angus Kidman, who's regularly on the show, but my better half is a primary teacher, and they're doing a unit on the history
Ancient
of
history?
technology. And yeah, BlackBerries are really old school now, so it worked. But I just thought, God knows what's on this phone. I'd
If it's
better
belonged to
wipe it
Gus,
to be
yeah.
sure.
I wouldn't just wipe it, I'd disinfect it. I'd give it a good, wash over with a Windex. So this week we're also joined by EFTM's man who knows all things about Android and Google, Dan Tyson. Dan, welcome back to the show. What old tech would you bring back from the grave?
Look, I just moved house and I have been going through all the old tech I've actually kept. So I've gone back as far as an old Nokia analog phone, 2100. I've got a tracker pager. Who remembers those?
Oh,
Vaguely.
I found the full manual and quick setup guide for a Nokia 5110. Also the Siemens C11, which was a terrible phone from Optus, but we'll move on. But yeah, I had great fun finding all these phones and donating them to Mobile Buster. So,
so you're sending them to the grave, not
oh,
bringing
they're
them back.
gone.
Yeah. That mobile analog phone will be great for keeping all the papers in the right spot on your desk. That's all it's good for.
Although I've just worked out a form factor we should revive, because I just realised I didn't really answer your question, Adam. The Nokia communicator, remember that?
Oh,
Ooh.
the
Slide
brick.
out,
Yeah.
keyboard, screen, way ahead of its time. I reckon you could do some really interesting things with that form factor and like a modern operating system. HMD Global should make it happen, and obviously pay me millions for the idea.
And handy for self-defense because you could club a man to
Oh, that
death
thing
with
was
that
brick.
thing.
That thing was a brick. You could build houses out of it.
So Dan's joining us this week because it's a big week for Google with a new lightweight operating system designed to bring an old PC back from the dead. Plus, Android apps have finally landed on Windows 11. But before we dive into the terrors of the Windows registry, there are some big changes afoot in the world of electric vehicles. Now, you still probably can't find a cheap one, but there's a big shift in the way that Australians will be able to use the batteries in their electric vehicles. We caught up with Technology Uncorked's Jeff Quattromani to talk turning your EV into a battery on wheels. Jeff, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
So, with all these acronyms, V to G, V to H, what are we talking about here?
So what we're talking about here is, if you do have an electric vehicle, when you do bring it home and it's plugged in the garage, if the car itself doesn't need to be recharging, why not use the battery to feed power into the home? And if the home doesn't need it, why not feed that power back into the grid so you can make some money off the power? Because the reality is that if there's plenty of juice left in that battery and you don't need that much juice to get to work the next day, why not actually consume some of that power and, save on your power bill or make some money off the grid?
Because what we're talking about with pretty much any EV on the market, not that there's that many in Australia, is a battery that's actually bigger than the consumer grade, home batteries that people have for solar storage, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the things people probably don't realize is that the Tesla Powerwall is a smaller battery than what you would have in a Tesla, for example. But even when you think about the Nissan Leaf, which is a much more common or I guess more affordable electric car, the battery in that can also be used as well. So you don't have to spend $100,000 on a Tesla to actually have this capability. You can be doing it with a much cheaper electric vehicle. But it must be pointed out that not all electric vehicles will support this vehicle to grid or vehicle to home technology. That's something that will come back down to the manufacturer and down to the vehicle level. But I can tell you that about 2 years ago, I was in Japan with Nissan and we went to their headquarters where the staff who drive Nissan Leaf vehicles come to the office, they plug in, but during the day, the cars which don't need the power, they're actually feeding the office when it's at its peak time. And then at about 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that power is starting to feed back into the cars so that employees can drive home. So, vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, it's absolutely happening already. And I mean, look, Japan's always a bit ahead of the curve, and they've been doing it for a couple of years now.
Now, that's one of the things you've got to be smart with the charging because this whole range anxiety thing. I don't want to wake up in the morning and not have enough juice to get to work.
Yes, and this is the reality. You have to make sure that you know what you're doing the next day, so that you don't tell the car to completely drain the battery overnight to support the home. It just does it enough that even when you get down to the off-peak charging rates, you can actually then recharge the car at a cheaper rate than you would have had you been charging the car when you first got home. So making sure you get to the office. Hopefully, you can even plug in at the office and get a free charge from there as well. That's all those capabilities that we should be thinking about, because having 100% charge in the morning isn't actually required if you only need 10% to get to work.
And for most cars, that's the case. The average is like 30 to 40 kilometres a day for most Australian cars. So combine that with the capacity of most vehicles, you'd actually have to be burning through quite a bit of power in your home to drain the car completely flat.
Yes.
But you brought up the Leaf, you brought up the model thing. It's not every model. I mean, I'm someone who drives a Leaf, but my Leaf is old enough that it actually will never support this. And even the most popular EV range in Australia at the moment does not support it at all.
Yeah, and this is the thing is, I guess if you are going to be considering a vehicle to home type installation at some point, having a bit more attention to what car you're purchasing next will make a difference. But, I think the reality for a lot of people is they get huge benefits from an electric vehicle without that technology to
Mm.
begin with. So it's not like you shouldn't buy one if it doesn't support vehicle to home, but hey, it's a nice little bonus if you can get it.
But you've also got to spend a bit of money in the home, isn't it? And that's what we're starting to see here. The first bi-directional chargers coming to Australia.
Yeah, and this is a big point of contention, because a charger that does bi-directional could cost you about $10,000. So if you factor in the cost, I'm going to save some electricity in the evenings, but I have to spend $10,000 to get that functionality to work. That's a long payoff. Even if it's the price of a battery in the home, effectively. So you need to start thinking, will my car actually be there when I need it to be charging my home or to be powering my home? Because if I go out of an evening, guess what? I'm actually taking power off the grid again. Whereas if I had a battery attached to my wall, that would always be there, even if the car is not. So, yeah, bidirectional chargers, very expensive thing to add into the home because it's not always going to be used, especially.
But at the same time, you can't exactly drive a Powerwall down to the shops. So
No,
there's a utility argument as
Mm.
well.
there is. And it comes back to anything, really. I mean, do you want to have solar panels on the roof, or do you want to rely on the car to power the home? Do you want to put a battery on the wall or hope that the car will be there when you need it? I mean, the best world would be to have all of those things. But when you're talking about such high value products at the moment, it's hard to decide where you're going to do it. And I think for most people, it's thinking about how they live. Are they always home in the evenings? Will they be able to get a full charge at the office to bring it home and power their home? It's that conversation people need to have and see which one suits them.
But it's also that return on investment because if you're already spent the money, like spending the money on solar panels on the roof, your return on investment's going to be within a few years, and you've got until when you sell the house to make that money back, right?
Mhm.
Then you've got the battery, the same thing. But if you've got panels on the roof and a battery, then that makes the return on the investment for the battery in the car even longer. And you want to get that back within the life of the car, which may not be the same as how long you're going to live in the house. So the numbers don't always stack up.
No, they don't always stack up. And when you've got a $10,000 charger that needs to go on the wall to be able to get that juice from the car back into the home, that's a very long payoff. I mean, I don't know what everyone else's power bills are, but $10,000 is a number of years if you're
Especially
actually
if you've already
feeding
got
power off the
solar,
grid.
so your power bills have already come right down.
Exactly.
Bearing in mind, though, pretty much any analysis ever done on private car ownership says that it's a bad deal. You're actually losing money
Oh,
on
yeah, yeah.
private car ownership anyway. So the return on investment thing, I think there's a number of angles you can approach this from, and I think the mobility of the vehicle plus then being able to use its battery when you're at home for whatever purpose. I do take the point that it does need to help pay for itself, but I don't think it's the whole story to speak of, especially when you consider the utility of having it for those periods where you might have blackouts or bushfires or interrupted power supply. Being able to say, right, no, we can run off the car for a bit, even if there isn't power in this area. We can run off the car for a bit. There might be a fast charger up the way you can get to, recharge the car, come back home, and the power is still flowing, and the freezer hasn't defrosted.
I was about to say that's going to be one of the best features there is that if you do have a blackout, supporting your house with your car is something that people cannot do at the moment. But that means your meat doesn't go off, your beer stays cold. Life's pretty good if your car can keep all that going.
And there's well, hang on, two things. One, we didn't talk standards. And the great thing about standards is that there's so many of them, as they say.
Yeah.
You could go out and spend 10 grand to buy this bi-directional charger for the electric car that you have today, but you don't know that it will work with the next electric car that you have because it's not standardized, is it, between all the cars yet?
No, it's not. And that comes down to so many different factors. And it could be just as simple as the connectors to begin with. But, voltage rates and things like that play into this conversation. So generally, the bidirectional charger, even just the charger for any electric vehicle, will mostly be per car. And then you
Mm.
have to start thinking about, well, what's my next car going to be? And will it be compatible with that one? Especially if you've got more than one electric vehicle in the home. Can you feed off one? Can you feed off both? Yeah, it's a challenge, but it's a fun one to have at the moment, I think.
The plugs and charging thing is a complex matter. I think at this stage it's still very much in that enthusiast space. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I'm very very keen on EVs, but as I think the listeners know, but that being said, it's still in that enthusiast space where actually there are a lot of kind of converter options. It's not an absolute that if you buy this now in a couple of years it's definitely going to be obsolete. It may be as simple as spending a little bit to get just a converter plug so it goes into a different vehicle. We're at least seeing a bit more standardization in vehicle chargers, which hopefully should flow through to these as well. But there are certainly no guarantees, especially as those standards and the way that all of this works, not just vehicle to home, but vehicle to grid, actually operates.
So true. So true.
Now, one of the things here is that your electric car may not want you to do this. And that's the thing with Teslas. They don't do this because it's not covered for the battery's warranty.
Yes. And I guess this is really until someone like Elon Musk decides that it is a good idea. And, you can just imagine that there
So
will
it's got
be
to make crypto in your car or something. If your car can crypto mine, suddenly it's like, yes, let's do it.
It'll be supported in the Cybertruck only.
Yeah.
Well, I fundamentally believe that this is something that Tesla will probably do, but they'll do it in their own way. They'll do it
Yeah.
in their own unique way that makes it a compelling reason that if you're buying a Tesla, you'll also want to have
They'll
vehicle to
Apple it,
vehicle to home.
basically.
They'll
Mm.
Apple it. They absolutely will. And when they do it, it'll feel like they were the first ones who've ever done it as well, just like Apple.
So as we said earlier, there's two different things here. There's V to G and V to H. V to H is vehicle to home, which was what we're talking about here. And the big Ford's making a big deal of this in the US. They're bringing out their electric F-150, I think it is, the F-150 Lightning. And the big deal is, in a storm, it'll keep your home running. But vehicle to grid is a whole different story again, isn't it? There's a lot more complexity in there.
Yeah, vehicle to grid is an interesting one because perhaps you're at home or maybe you're actually on holidays, whatever the case may be. You could be using your car to feed power back into the grid. And people who have solar panels on their roof at the moment would know that they can actually be selling their excess power back to the grid and making some money from that. So you could do the same thing with your battery in the car. It wouldn't be potentially as useful as what you get from solar panels because that's a continuous feed from the sun. But yes, you could absolutely be feeding back to the grid and then taking it back when the rates are cheaper. So imagine feeding back during peak times and then charging back in the evenings. That means that first thing in the morning, you're good to go on 100% still, but maybe you've made some money along the way.
But none of the power companies will let you do it. Yeah, it's a whole infrastructure thing, isn't it? A lot of people have to sign off on it.
There is. I mean, the whole way through, anything that we're talking about here, whether it's vehicle to grid or even your solar panels to the grid, there is a conversation to be had with the manufacturer of the plugs, the manufacturer of the actual units, but also your power companies as well. Will they support it? Will they take the feed? Not all of them are doing it, and not all of them have very good rates either. So it's one of those conversations people need to have.
And it gets quite complicated because there's also issues of control over that power flow, which way it's going, whether or not they'll even accept it into the grid at a certain time. And I mean, there's been a bit of reporting around this just for people with solar panels right now. Once you add a car into the mix, you've got this kind of question of, well, do I want my electricity operator who might be saying, well, God, we need all the electrons we can get quickly, drain Jeff's car. Do you want that? At the same time, do you want necessarily you've sent some power up to the grid and they go, oh, yeah, well, actually, we don't really want that. But your car might already be full and suddenly you're not getting anything for that power that you've sent there. It's just been given for free. It is a very complicated kind of regulatory setup and as is often the way with a lot of these things, not one I think that favors the consumer in terms of ease of understanding.
It's not easy to understand, and you can draw diagrams until the cows come home. It still doesn't make a lot of sense to people. I think, as you started off with, Alex, this is more for enthusiasts, and enthusiasts know this stuff. Those who are buying electric vehicles have been reading about electric vehicles for years. They're buying them because they believe in electric vehicles, not necessarily the economics of it all. So I think those who are going to start doing, vehicle to home, vehicle to grid, this is again still very early adopter stage. We're only now seeing bi-directional chargers come to Australia, so we've got a long way to go, but at least we can start the conversation, and hopefully by the time we can all start to actually use this technology, we'll all understand it, I hope.
And hopefully there'll be a few more EVs in market too.
Yes, we hope so.
It's a bigger conversation in Australia, though, because as soon as everybody, and we've already seen it just with solar panels, as soon as people start putting power back into the grid, then we need less power from other sources. So suddenly we've got to start thinking about how many coal stations do we want to still run and how quickly do we want to shut them down and how are we going to load balance this thing. So it actually needs to be done. I mean, if we had, a national, energy policy that was actually coherent and looked past the next election, that would help. But we need to have those kind of big conversations to make this work, don't we? You can't just all randomly start throwing power back into the grid and hope for the best.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And you have to also factor in that if you're an energy company, you don't want to be thinking about how many EVs are out there and hope that they're actually all going to want to do power back into the grid and rely on them plugging in every evening. So they're always going to need to have baseload power and think about, well, if people are feeding energy into the grid, is it just a nice to have, or are we actually going to be relying on it during peak periods? So I think it's that two-way street of saying who's going to jump first and who's going to say, yes, this is something we think is a priority and something we'll actually accept. And you're right. I think it comes back down to policy and what we do as a country, not just what we do as individual companies.
I don't think there's any power company out there that's likely to rely on vehicle to grid kind of power. That being said, it's a step we need to take. I mean, environmentally speaking, even economically speaking, the economics are really, really clear on this
Mm.
that renewable resources are actually more economically viable than traditional fossil fuels. That transition has to happen. Will it be a bumpy one along the way? Yeah, there will be bumps. But as we've seen, for example, in South Australia, it is one of those things that can be managed and can provide quite reliable baseload power. This can be part of that story because you get also into the complexities of the economics of what you charge consumers and what you pay them, when the power is going one way or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still think back to that experience I had with Nissan in their office where, the car park was full of Nissan Leafs plugged in and thinking about the amount of workplaces that we have. And if people were driving to work and able to plug in and feed back into the grid, so effectively that workplace is running on zero energy from the grid. That's an incredible thing to see happen because those big workplaces, all the lights, all the power they actually consume throughout the day, if you can eliminate that, that's much more valuable than eliminating 100 homes in a suburb from the grid. So taking those workplaces off and having them run on battery would be incredible to see happen. We just need to do some catching up.
There's also, I mean, we talked about this as well in the context of people having solar panels, which is becoming, of course, super common.
Mm.
There are plenty of people, I'm one of them, who can't have solar panels. I have too many trees around my home in my case, but there's plenty of people in apartments and the like where solar panels are not going to be a thing. Does this make enough sense if you can't do solar?
In some ways, it could. Again, the whole tipping point of payoff will be the argument here. In that, if you're going to spend money on a new car, how much more are you spending to make it EV in the first place before considering the costs of implementing, charging, which is bi-directional and things like that. But also, you have to think about if you can't have solar, maybe it's because you live in an apartment. Does your apartment building support bi-directional charging, or can you actually even get that synchronization between your car in the basement to where you are staying in apartment 3B, for example. So I think that conversation will start to happen more at a landlord level. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing apartments of the future being built, which actually start to have this technology that, residents can start to pull in and say, mark me as zero because I'm going to plug my electric car in every evening. We'll wait and see.
People in 3A have had it too good for too long. I need my power.
Bastards.
Exactly.
That being said, though, the other thing is, I suppose, we are still in Australia in early days with this technology. And like EVs themselves, there's a reasonable position to say that this stuff should become cheaper to implement, cheaper to buy over time as it becomes more commonplace, it could become the thing, a bit like having a simple, granny style charger, as they say, in the boot of your new EV. They might chuck one of these in, when you buy your EV in 5 to 10 years' time, at which point it's just part of what you get.
Completely agree. I mean, let's not forget that 12-volt socket in our cars used to just be for the cigarette lighter. And, now we can power devices from it. Whereas in the past, we didn't think we could actually do that. It was just about, lighting up your next cigarette. So, that kind of technology was very basic when it first came out. But now we see how much more we can do with 12-volt power in the car. This is another element of that in some ways, that here is a new piece of technology. We need to start getting better at using it. And as we do, we'll find new ways of using it, but also ways of making it cheaper. So this is always the first step.
Well, Jeff, I think there's an awful lot to look forward to there. Thanks so much for making time for the show this week.
No, thanks for having me.
It's now time for you to face the vertical hold 3 questions of doom. I'll hit you with all three at once. You can answer them in any order you like.
Okay.
Where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And if you had to pick an animal that was going to be turned into a robot, what would it be and why?
Okay. You can find my podcast called Technology Uncorked available each week. And I've already forgotten what the second question was, but I think it's social media. If you can
It
spell
was.
my last name, it's Quattramani. Then do your best. I'm Jeff Quattramani on most social media platforms. And if I could turn any animal into a robot, it would be ducks, because they are spending more time in my pool at the moment, and they would probably get electrocuted the next time they jump back in, because I'm so tired of scaring them away.
I feel sorry for the ducks now.
Sorry, ducks, but I'm done with you. I'm done.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
So it's a big week in software updates. Not the most thrilling of topics, to be sure, but in the world of Microsoft and Windows 11, they've finally announced that you will be able to run Android apps on Windows 11. Dan, we've been waiting a while for this to actually happen, haven't we?
Yeah, so they announced this last year when Windows 11 sort of really got pushed out. It's obviously Windows 11. It's using the Amazon App Store, currently released as US only. I don't know about you, gentlemen, but have you ever used the Amazon App Store for Android apps?
Yes, I have, sort of.
So it's you.
Sort
You're the
of.
guy.
In that I've reviewed, and this is going back a few years, some of Amazon's Fire tablets. And that is, of course, an Android App Store
Yeah.
interface. It's the same kind of thing. The US only, though, that's a bit of a pain. I was trying to work out if you could kind of VPN around it just to see how it goes. But Microsoft seems to be smarter than me. Maybe not a big claim, because I couldn't get it to work. Have you had any joy, Dan?
Not as such. I know a few people have actually gotten it to work, but I think the general consensus is that the apps are basically still the versions that you probably reviewed when you were doing the Fire tablets a few years ago.
Oh!
And that's one of the concerns about the Amazon App Store. I mean, they really haven't updated a lot of apps. Admittedly, I haven't actually been there recently on an Android phone to actually check out the latest updates. But famously, they were missing things like Instagram and stuff like that, which are definitely things that Microsoft want to have their users access to. So yeah, it's a bit of a strange one.
Why would they do it this way? Why would they stick to the Amazon store and not give you access to the full Google Play Store?
I think it just comes down to corporate little bits of stakeholding in their territory. I reckon maybe. I mean, Google has actually announced that they're bringing Google Play Games to Windows, which means Android games on Windows, but are not the full App Store experience. So maybe they wanted it and Google didn't want to, and so they looked for an alternative source. So that's basically where we're looking at the Amazon App Store. And
I think there's also an element of sandboxing there, because when you introduce new operating system paradigm into Windows, already classically very heavily attacked operating system in terms of malware, you've got big security risks. So while I haven't been able to test it, I would presume that the Amazon App Store adds that sandboxing element to keep the core Windows operating system reasonably secure, shall we say.
yeah, the Amazon App Store tended to have a lot of more direct relationships with the developers and sort of checking apps and stuff like that. So Google's got a lot of bouncer like type software. They actually call it bouncer to vet apps as they go through the Play Store process. Amazon's got the same sort of thing, which offers that security that Microsoft sort of wants and needs for users to bring mobile apps or the mobile app experience onto the desktop. And I mean, there's thousands of games and apps and stuff which people would love to have a go at on their Windows desktop that would help them, little utilities or even full apps experiences. So it's that sort of thing. But yeah, security wise, I mean, Amazon tends to be pretty good, but they never got the full range of like a full blast of Android users really coming to download hundreds of millions of apps and things like that. And they tended to be older versions, not kept up to date as much, and that obviously didn't test it out as much. So I think there's still a lot to be seen there as to what Microsoft and Amazon are both doing in the background to court those developers. And we've seen how that goes with mobile developers and Microsoft in the past. So we'll have to wait and see on that one, I guess.
This idea of running mobile apps on a desktop has been kicking around for a long time, or even making hybrid mobile desktop devices so you've got those apps at your fingertips. But has it ever really taken off? Has anyone done it right? Do we really want this, or is this a solution to a problem that no one really has?
I think there's utility there. Like you can get some of those like really interesting little apps, even just like converter apps or just like widgets more on your desktop that Microsoft hasn't brought in yet with through their widget pane on Windows 11 as yet. There's that sort of experience, and obviously gaming's a big thing. Obviously, Google thinks so enough to bring Google Play games to Windows, and obviously Apple's sort of thinking about it with iOS apps and things like that, with that crossover between the iPad and Mac OS. Chrome OS has been doing it with Android apps. That's more or less a sort of hit and miss experience still, though. So I'm not completely sold on it myself. But what do you guys think? Like, what's your sort of experience with mobile apps on a desktop been?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned iOS, and I mean that's been a factor on the Mac for a while now. And obviously, Apple's got that slightly tighter control, so we can integrate it a bit better. I don't get the feeling that set the world on fire. I don't get the feeling that lots of Mac users went, "Woohoo! We can run the iOS version of Twitter instead."
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to have been a big thing. My concern on the Android side of things, though, is more. And Dan, you may have a different viewpoint on this, of course. With Android tablets, with larger screen Android devices, a lot of those apps run really badly. They don't optimize for the screen space. That's going to be the same story for a lot of Windows. And yeah, the widgety ones, the ones you might have as a sideline, that's okay. But for those apps where you might actually want to get something done, whether it's a game, whether it is some kind of productivity thing, it's always been a bit suboptimal on a tablet. I reckon there's a big problem there purely because of the way those apps seem to have been developed. Apple has, because of its whole kind of walled garden approach, I think they've done it a bit better. Not always 100%, but a fair bit better than Google has in this respect.
Yeah, because they can force all the guidelines and things
Mm.
like that for the tablet experience, which Google hasn't ever really done. I mean, they every year or so they come out with these new guidelines that say they're going to get tough on developers to force them to these new experiences and design paradigms for like Chromebooks and tablets and things like that. But the end result is never that pretty. So we tend to find that it's one of those things that every time they announce it, we hope. But the Android, as you said, the Android experience on a tablet, and that translates to Chromebooks as well, because they're
Mm.
basically like put
Yeah.
them in 360-degree hinge on some of these Chromebooks, and yeah, you've got a tablet, and it's not that great. I mean, you sometimes get the tablet mode on an app, sometimes you don't. Sometimes there's a bit of wonkiness. I know there's games that I've tried to play that just flat out have graphic meltdowns as soon as they come near a Chromebook. So it's that sort of thing that there's still a lot of work to do, and whether Microsoft can really bridge that gap with the Amazon Android marketplace, and then bring it. Ooh, yeah, that's a big question.
It's also one of those solutions that's been around in kind of weirder other ways for a while.
Mm.
I mean, Samsung phones can do it with Windows in a certain way. There's the whole Your Phone app thing for Windows 11, third-party apps like BlueStacks and so on. Um, Given they've existed, do you think that demand is actually there? Because they still all feel kind of niche. I recognize Your Phone because every time I set up a Windows PC, it's like, would you like to connect your phone to this computer? No, I wouldn't. Moving right along.
Exactly right. It's one of those things. Every time you set up Windows, it's like, oh, you can connect your Android phone. No, no, thank you. Uh, but like even Google's continuing to do it, but they're also looking at other ways because they've like there's leaks surrounding now about things like streaming apps to your Chromebook without actually installing the Android app. So it'll come up in like the phone hub on your sort of your start menu sort of thing on your Chromebook, and that's sort of another way. So, but again, like who's asking for it?
To
People
me,
who
this
don't like phone battery life.
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather have like if I've got a Windows desktop, then at least give me some really cool little widgets. I mean, a lot of these big companies are very hesitant to do these widgets because they want to encourage third parties. Look, that may take 6 months. I really want it now. So if you could just give me a little basic widget to do X, Y, and Z, that'd be great.
to me, this is a one-way street, and they're going the wrong way up the street. Because I can think of plenty of times where I wished I had access to the desktop version of an app in my pocket, but I cannot really think of any time sitting in front of my computer thinking, man, I really need the mobile version of this. I mean, aside from games, I understand that's a different thing because it might be a mobile game that you can't get on the desktop. But games aside, I can't really think of a scenario where I've sat down and said, I need this. I can totally live without this.
And that's one of the benefits I like about Chrome OS because it is a full desktop browser, and you often get things like if I go to Telegram, I just go to web.telegram.org in the URL, and it's full experience. It's everything there. I don't need to download an Android app to get that, which is
Yeah.
actually not a great Android app on Chrome OS. So yeah, I mean, there's other ways to get it, and PWA, like the progressive web apps, are actually bridging a lot of that gap that websites have that provide these services that people use. You can go to like photop.com and you can get like this nearly full Photoshop experience on Chrome OS, and like there's just yeah, I'm not seeing the real demand for it. Like I use Android apps, but it's mainly a game if I'm bored or something. Like
PWA is a phrase that we heard a lot about and then not so much. Now, hang on, what did you say it stood for again? It was
it's progressive web
So
apps.
it's basically an app, something that runs in a browser like a website, but is
It
more
it is the
fully
whole
featured like an
website.
app.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
basically the website can download itself
So
as like a self-contained little unit as an app.
do we not hear about it anymore because they've given up about it or
Oh
because
no,
it's just become so common that we just don't even think about it anymore?
no, we sort of do hear about it every now and then. Like Google's constantly moving a lot of their web apps to progressive web apps that you can use, like Gmail and stuff that you
Yeah.
can use without the whole browser and stuff like that. So there's a lot of work there, and companies do it all the time. Like it's just one of those things that they sort of see that they can do it, and because it's sort of cross-platform, like you don't need to have like a Google thing to actually use a PWA. It's a PWA. It's usable on every browser. It's a cross-platform, so it's something that gets around an app without having to develop an app.
Sounds like a better solution for what they're trying to do here than what they're doing with the Android store.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, a lot of these concepts, like some of these apps and games and stuff, are so complex you can't have it as a PWA, so
Yeah.
you need an app. But yeah, for a lot of these things, PWAs definitely are a great option.
Adam, I think I've also worked out the other way that you could solve your wanting a desktop app on a phone thing, and you get to revive an ancient tech doing it. Anyone remember the Motorola Atrix?
Oh yes,
Yes, I was thinking of that before. I thought you were going to
yes.
say take a phone and gaff tape it to the side of my computer.
I think
But
I
yes,
actually
the
got
That
an
Atrix.
was the
Atrix.
Motorola Atrix,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
pretty much. Yeah.
I
So
think
that
I
was
have
what
an Atrix here actually.
it was. So it was a phone, an Android phone, and then a shell of a computer, and you basically slip the phone into the shell to turn it into a big phone computery thing.
Yep.
Yeah,
It was actually, to be fair to Motorola, I mean, it didn't work
This
very
is like
well, was the
nearly 20
problem.
years ago. Yeah,
But 10, I think. But
and more.
it was
Not
Got to
around
be
much
the
more.
older
Galaxy
than that.
S2, I think it was.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
not that much
Okay,
more, but
it's been a
the
long
issue
pandemic.
really was it wasn't powerful enough. It's the
No,
kind of thing that Samsung's sort of trying to do and sort of trying to push with Dex, and it's
yeah.
just that again the market and the need for it just doesn't seem to be there. I'm sure there are people out there, and there may well be listeners going, "But I use this all the time," and that's fine. It's fine to have a niche market. In terms of that broader market, in terms of all the Windows users, as Microsoft is slowly going to be rolling this out to, I don't know that it's happening in that way.
So, Dan, we've also heard this week from Google about Chrome OS Flex. Everybody loves a good flex. What's this one about?
So Chrome OS Flex is actually the result of something that happened about just over a year ago. They bought a company called Neverware, who basically produced something called Cloud Ready OS, which was basically the public version of Chrome OS. And their whole shtick was you can actually stick it onto just about any old laptop that you could find. Like I'm talking, I've put Neverware stuff onto 2008 Toshibas. That was pretty impressive, that then turned it into an actual usable machine, because Windows from on that sort of gen machine doesn't run spectacularly.
Run is
So
not the word.
Yes.
run is not the word.
Crawl.
Slow crawl is definitely the one you should ask. So yeah, basically Google bought them in December 2020. They've now rolled that into a whole Google product that you can actually run on your old Macs, even old Windows machines. So basically, it's a version you can actually try out on a USB stick, like sort of like the old Linux Live boot, and you can see what it runs like on that sort of laptop before you commit to a full breakdown and install it on the actual hard drive. So it's basically that. It's at the moment it's still just in a trial basis. So it doesn't include a lot of things like you don't get Android apps on there, you don't get Linux, but the Linux containers may be coming later. So still bare bones, but it's essentially turning those old laptops you have lying around the place into something usable.
Well, it's essentially turning them into very early Chromebooks. I mean, I gave this a
Mm,
try. So their pitch on this is for enterprises. At the moment, if you want it, you go through what looks like a scary enterprise-looking portal that wants to know how many people are in your business. Slight spoiler: Google may not thank me for this. It doesn't seem to care if you put gibberish in there.
no.
It'll let you through and it'll let you start creating the
Look,
bootable
who are they to
USB.
judge in a form?
Yeah.
Clearly, I could be the next billionaire. It's unlikely, but I could be. But I tried this just running on a much older MacBook, and it's a bit weird,
Mm,
a Chromebook which is a MacBook, but it did function. But it very much felt to me, Dan, like those very first Chromebooks. Those kind of
mm,
there's a web browser, and it really doesn't do much else at this point. Relative to even to like I've got $100 Chromebook that I bought 'cause it was
mm.
$100 basically. It does a lot more than this does right now.
Yeah, I mean, functionality wise, it's going to be fairly limited because they're still getting their head around what Neverwhere we're actually doing with Cloud Ready. I mean, when they were operating independently, it was massively popular for Chrome OS people to sort of grab any sort of things around schools were using it and stuff like that to turn whole lots of these old laptops, which were literally gathering dust, into actual usable notebooks that kids could use. So it's offering that sort of e-waste reduction that enterprise and schools are sort of really big on. And I mean, who doesn't know an organization with a couple of hundred old laptops lying around gathering dust that either should be thrown out or repaired? And this is an option for them. So, but as I said, limited functionality, and as you saw, it's really limited at the moment. There's no Play Store, there's no Linux containers, nothing like that. So, if you want just a web browser that can sort of do that, which is what a lot of people use a Chromebook for, great. If that's what your business requires, I mean, Office 365 in the cloud and stuff like that, you can do a lot of work there. So, yeah, do you really need Android apps? Probably not.
To me, there's one huge deal breaker here that I was really surprised about. It has to run on 64-bit architecture.
Mm,
It won't run on an old 32-bit processor. And to me, that like knocks out almost every computer that I have lying around the house that have jumped to mind I could test this on. No, 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 they're all out.
mm.
If you've got an old computer that you're not using anymore, but it's still a 64-bit machine, then I would guess that probably, while it might not break any speed records, it's probably still usable. The machines you've got lying around that you think, yeah, that thing just I can't use anymore, would be 32-bit machines. Why wouldn't they? And I understand from a technical reason why it's harder to go back to 32-bit. Maybe it's security, I don't know, but doesn't it defeat the purpose of this thing a little bit not to run on 32-bit older CPUs?
Yeah, because the initial when it first came out, it was running on just about everything. You could throw like 1 gig of RAM at it and an old processor, and it'd sort of eat it up. It'd chunk a bit, but yeah, I mean, Chrome OS sort of does eat a bit of RAM, but it'd run, and it would actually run like a freshly installed, like an old Linux Live boot. It'd be nice and fresh and zippy and sort of
Yeah.
stuff like that. But in this sort of iteration, I guess they're going a little bit slower and really want to limit the sort of stuff to 64-bit architecture. Whether they expand that out down the track, I don't know. But, well, yeah.
Because this is
To
still
be
only an early release, right? This is not the full release. So it is
No,
possible down the track it could be available for more
yeah, I mean,
devices.
they're taking feedback and stuff like that, so you can sort of feedback that to them, and I'm sure a lot of sysadmins will be sort of giving that sort of feedback to them.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it is sort of limited in its functionality, but hopefully, yeah, we'll see more on the list soon.
to be fair, if we're talking 64-bit, just having quickly checked the history, that should go back to like an Intel Core 2. That's like a
Mm,
2006 PC. Now, not all of the things that you bought in 2006 will be 64-bit, but
Exactly.
some of them
Yeah.
were, and that's where
mm,
that starts to flow through from. If you've got a 16-plus-year-old computer that you want to revive this way. There are ways to do it. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that it's unfair that they don't.
Yeah, because I've got one of the. I've just actually been perusing the compatibility list, and I've got one of the old MacBook Pro 13 inches that's actually on the list of compatible. So I think I'm going to give that a whirl.
That was going to be my question without notice, is that I've got one of the early Intel Macs. Are all of the Intel Macs 64-bit?
I would think so.
I would
A
think
question
so
without
as
notice,
well,
so I'm
but I
doing
couldn't
this off the
swear
top of
to
my
it.
head.
Yeah.
But from when they brought that architecture in, I would have thought that the processors, because at that point Apple was fairly forward-looking in terms of grabbing Intel stuff pretty quick when it came out. I would have thought so. Also, because most of those machines could jump up to the point where they did 64-bit Mac OS.
Okay,
So,
no, quick Google search says there are a few
okay,
ones that are
I'm
Core
happy to stand
Duos.
corrected because I
Yeah,
didn't have the research on that one
I think you'd be
handy.
pretty unlucky, but it looks like some of the really old ones could be 32-bit. So it's possible it won't run on an old Mac too.
But it does bring up another interesting point, which, and Dan, you said you were checking the compatibility list. They've
Mm.
supplied this kind of list of here's the stuff we've kind of played around with, and there may be issues. There are, of course, thousands, if not millions, of other iterations and variations out there they haven't tried. It doesn't take long to actually build this thing onto an 8 gig USB stick, and all you've really got to do is plug it in, work out how to tell your system to boot from USB, and you can work out if it's going to happen at all.
That's it. It's one of those, like, it's just like putting in a Linux Live CD. You build that little USB, plug it in, get it to boot, off you go. You can try it out. I mean, it comes down to whether you should just be running a Linux Live version or I mean, that's an option for old PCs, of course. So that's an option. I mean,
And that'd be more likely to run with 32-bit, wouldn't it?
yeah, I mean, Linux has definitely got a lot more support, but there's also that prickly support with Linux. Like, if you run into Linux problems, you tend to run into hard walls, whereas if you run into Chrome OS issues, it's generally covered under Chrome OS support. So there's a little bit more support for not as skilled users there. But I mean, if you're a good Linux user and you're comfortable with that environment, you're probably going to find that's a lot better off for you.
You'd probably make a lot more of it as long as you love the command line, essentially speaking.
Exactly.
I wonder, though, as well, for those less technically adept users, where this might have some real benefits is in security. Not that Linux is insecure, far from it, but there's more configuration. There's more stuff you can get wrong. Whereas in this case, you're kind of saying to Google, as with a Chromebook, hey, why don't you take care of that difficult stuff for me? Here's a system, please kind of keep updating it, even though you might lose some functionality along the way.
Yeah, they're basically like, here's an old laptop, set up a sandbox, and Google goes, yeah. So it's just one of those sort of easier use things that, like, comes down to whether if you're comfortable with Linux, it's probably a better system. If you're not, and you're this is great for parents. I mean, I've handed older people or people not au fait with technology a Chromebook because I know as soon as they call me and they're getting problems, pop-ups or anything like that, all right, we're going to this thing, settings, advanced settings. We're going to click the thing called Power Wash.
Yeah.
And they're back in
Take
action
off and
within.
nuke the site from orbit.
I mean,
It's the only way to
they're,
be
they're
sure.
back in action in 2 minutes. So whereas Linux, if you're going to nuke that thing, that's an afternoon.
That's an acid bath and a trench in the backyard.
Bag of quicklime and a small shovel.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Jeff for making time for the show a little earlier, and to Dan for joining us in the studio today.
Anytime. I always love talking Google and Chrome stuff.
And we always love having you on the show. And you've been on the show before, so you know you're about to face the Vertical Hold 3 questions of doom.
Bah, bah, bah.
Slightly revised today because I like making Adam sweat. You can answer these in any order you like, but I'll say all 3 of them in one burst. Where can people find your work online? Where can they find your social media online? And the new big contentious question, what's your secret skill or ability, and why does it make you special?
Okay, you can find my work at EFTM.com. Anywhere online, I'm usually under the name Frog Hollow, but with a PH. And what makes me special? Pretty much I can eat more than anyone I know.
Ooh.
I knew you were going to say that. I thought he's going to go with the hamburger thing.
I've heard you've got a special tattoo that gets some people very excited as well.
I've got lots of tattoos.
There's one
We
at
might want
Mountain.
to keep this family friendly.
There's one that you like. Tell us about the one you like to show off in Mountain View.
Oh, the Google I/O one. Yeah, I've been stopped in the halls by, by Googlers going, "You're the guy with the tattoo." It's like,
Yeah.
oh, yes. So yes, after my first Google I/O, I enjoyed the experience rather a lot. It'd been a lot of work to get there. So yeah, I got myself a Google I/O tattoo, man. Yeah, it's
That's
pretty
Oh,
hardcore.
awesome.
no.
On my back, just on the back. Perfectly family friendly.
Good to know. Good to know. And as always, if you want to catch up with the Vertical Hold team, you can do so online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at verticalhold.com.au, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And thanks everyone for dropping by again. Don't forget to leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice and help us spread the good word in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Oh, I can't figure out how to stop this backup, but it'll stop in a minute anyway.
Yeah.
It only runs for 7 minutes.
I would say if it's running off an M1 Mac, it shouldn't really
Yeah,
be
I'm
a
not-
process problem. But this is your haunted M1
Yes.
Mac. Anything could happen.
Yeah.